The Chronicles of Uzaya, a novel by Robert Ray. This audiobook is narrated by Silas Grim, an AI voice built from scratch. No human voice was used in the recording of this audio. Chapter 19. The Lattice Plate. Uzaya woke to the unfamiliar quiet of a place that expected nothing from him. Light leaked through warped shutters in thin ribbons, catching dust in the air. For a moment, he didn't move, listening, orienting himself. The cot creaked as he sat up. He swung his feet to the floor. A chipped basin waited on the table. Uzaya splashed his face, the cold cutting through the last of sleep. In the warped mirror by the shutters, he took quick stock. Stubble, a fading bruise, hair undone, nothing worth fixing. He dressed, checked the dagger at his hip, slid his old pipe into his coat, and went downstairs. Below, warmth and firelight filled Abe's shop. A pot gurgled on the stove. The air smelled faintly of bacon. Shelves lined the walls in careful order. Brass weights and scales, chipped statues, and colorful tide-polished glass. Another wall was hung with carved bone charms, lengths of chain, old keys, and other tools of trade and travel, each tagged with care. Abe stood behind the counter, attention fixed on a bronze hinge beneath a magnifying lens. He glanced up at last. "I can make eggs if you want." Uzaya tilted his head. Abe gestured toward the pot. "Or porridge. Help yourself." Uzaya crossed the room. The porridge was thick with oats and dried fruit, a pinch of cinnamon. Simple, warm. He ladled some into a clay bowl and sat on a stool near the hearth. They ate together in silence, just not the uncomfortable kind. Abe finished and leaned back, exhaling. "Do you ever go down into the old parts?" Uzaya asked. "The ruins? Everyone does, sooner or later. You looking for something specific?" "Just curious about what's under the quarter." "Most of it's flooded, unstable. But there are maintenance tunnels, the sewer of the old city, from before they stopped fighting the bay." He wiped his hands on a rag. "I used to own a warehouse, southern seawall, back when business was better." Uzaya waited. "Found a trap door in the floor one day," Abe said. "Maintenance access, I thought. Maybe smugglers had used it. Or there'd be something worth salvaging." He shrugged. "Went down a few times. There's a ladder, 60 feet or so. Drops you into the old tunnels." "What's down there?" "Nothing." The tunnel branched twice, left at the first split, straight through the second. He paused. "A collapse there kept me from going any farther." "Any other ways down?" "Hard to say." He set the plate down. "That's as close as I ever got to what's under the quarter." He met Uzaya's eyes. The interest hadn't waned. "Watch the tide. Southern seawall floods at high water. You don't want to be down there when it comes in." Uzaya nodded. "The warehouse is falling apart," Abe added. "Roof's mostly gone, but the trap door's still there. Central column, just past it." He hesitated. "Probably still blocked, but things shift down there." "Appreciate it," Uzaya said. Abe waved it off, then yawned. He looked back down at his work. "The tide's going to be low today. It should be a good time for me to check the east wharf, see if anything else worthwhile washed loose." Uzaya rose, tightening his coat. "I'll be out for a while." "Back by sundown?" Abe asked. "Not prying, just habit." "We'll see." Uzaya stepped out into the fog. The bell above the door jingled once, then went still. Abe stood alone in the quiet. He crossed to a shelf near the back and retrieved something wrapped in oilcloth. Set it on the counter, unwrapped it carefully. The lattice plate caught the light, bending it around itself. He'd found it 3 days ago. 2 days earlier, the Silver Spire. The Silver Spire rose from the southeastern cliffs overlooking the bay. Abe had made the climb before, twice, delivering salvaged bronze fittings and a set of precision calipers Vandrian had commissioned. Both times the mage had paid fair coin without complaint. The cliffside stairs were steep, narrow, slick with sea spray. Abe climbed carefully, one hand on the iron railing bolted into the rock face. The bay spread below him, gray-green water stretching to the horizon. Fishing boats worked the shallows. Gulls circled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. By the time he reached the top, his legs burned and his breath came hard. Smart choice of location, whether Vandrian planned it or not. The approach served as its own defense. A single precarious stairway, barely wide enough for one person to cross, steep enough to leave anyone winded and exposed the entire way up. The spire's entrance was modest, an oblong door set flush with the smooth stone exterior, flanked by narrow windows reinforced with iron crosshatch. No sign, no banner, only the door and the faint hum of enchantments from within. Abe knocked, and it opened almost immediately. Vandrian stood in the doorway, composed, but not quite at ease. His posture was controlled, movements precise, as if he rationed effort the way others rationed breath. He didn't look like a wizard. At first glance, he might have passed for a hermit scholar, but the impression didn't last. Attention showed in his eyes, a focus carried too far, as if knowledge had begun to leave its mark. His hair fell long and gray, his beard untrimmed, his face scored by years that showed in every line. He wore a dark working coat, reinforced at the cuffs, the fabric thick enough to take heat. A white shirt beneath it, collar open, sleeves rolled back and kept there. A leather apron hung from his shoulders, scarred by scorch marks and chemical burns. Narrow tools fixed along its edge, where his hands could find them without looking. "Abe," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." The interior felt more like a forge than a study. Tall windows cut into the outer wall admitted a hard coastal light, unfiltered. High ceilings were braced with iron beams. On either wall, work tables were bolted directly to the floor, their surfaces blackened by heat and pocked by acid. Brass instruments hung above them on hooks. A large slate table dominated the center of the room, its surface crowded with chalk diagrams, waveforms, geometric patterns, annotations layered in multiple colors, corrections scribbled over earlier work. Beside it stood a tall frame of copper wire, strung with taut lines like musical strings, though arranged in patterns that had nothing to do with music. At the far end of the room was a reinforced iron door. No handle, no visible lock, only smooth metal, worked with glyphs cut so deeply they appeared to be part of the door itself. The wards were active, quiet but unmistakable. Whatever Vandrian kept beyond it was not meant to be accessed casually or often. Vandrian cleared a space on the main workbench, brushing aside loose parchment and measuring tools. "Let's see it then." Abe unwrapped the object in the cloth. The plate was curved, no larger than a man's hand, its surface dark and glass smooth to the touch. An intricate lattice pattern ran across it, the ridges rising and falling without any obvious breaks or seams. It looked grown. Vandrian went still, attention fixed. He reached out, then hesitated. "May I?" Abe handed it over. Vandrian turned it slowly beneath the light. His fingers traced the lattice channels with the kind of care people reserve for things that might break if breathed on wrong. Where did you find this? East Wharf, embedded in a wall near the old storage houses. How deep? Just waist deep. Vandrian carried the plate to a brass lamp with a focusing lens, angling it beneath the concentrated beam. The channels within the lattice shimmered faintly, micro-thin pathways crisscrossing with geometric perfection. He stood quiet for a long time. "This wasn't made in the quarter," he said finally. "It doesn't look like it, but it's very old." "How can you tell?" "The precision." Vandrian pointed to where two channels intersected at a perfect angle. "See this? No tool marks, no grinding, no polishing. The lattice is integral to the material. It was all formed during creation, not added after. Purpose-built." He paused and added, "We don't know how this was done." He set the plate down and reached for a bigger magnifying lens. "These aren't decorations. They're harmonic channels." "You mean like sound?" Abe said, leaning in to look. "Yes, each pattern is tuned." He traced above a channel with one finger, careful not to touch. "It responds to vibration. It isn't meant to be struck. It's meant to answer." Vandrian straightened, turning the plate over in his hand. "See, the tuning breaks at the edges." He paused. "One plate does nothing," he said. "You'd need dozens, maybe hundreds, arranged correctly." Abe's pulse quickened. "Arranged to do what?" Vandrian didn't answer immediately. He turned the plate again, studying its curvature, the lattice flowing across the surface without interruption. "In simple terms, to regulate resonance," he said at last, looking up. "Not to create it, not to silence it, to control how it behaves once it's present. Whoever made it understood sound weaving at a structural level. These are older disciplines. Most knowledge of them is gone." "Have you seen work like this before?" Abe asked. "I've read about it." Vandrian set the plate down with care. "Veil guard construction, most likely." He tapped the plate once, lightly. "More pieces like this, assembled correctly, could give someone considerable power, should they learn how to use it." He met Abe's eyes. "I could use them," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise." He gestured to the plate. "If you're willing to part with this one, I'll pay you for it, properly. And if you find others, I'll compensate you for each." A fair offer. Abe had already made up his mind. He wrapped the plate back in its cloth, slowly, carefully. "I'll hold on to it." Something flickered behind Vandrian's expression, quickly masked. "Of course, it's yours." He stood up. "But if you change your mind, or if you find additional pieces, bring them here first. I'll match any offer you receive elsewhere." "Thank you, Vandrian." Vandrian walked him to the door, cordial, professional. But as Abe descended the cliffside stairs, the sense of being watched followed him all the way down. Vandrian had confirmed what Abe already suspected. The plate wasn't unique, and it wasn't inert. It belonged to something older, part of a larger system, which meant there were certainly more pieces, and whomever might gather them would decide what that system became. Abe left the spire with the sense that he was no longer just carrying an artifact, but a head start. He descended along the cliffside stairs faster than he'd climbed them. His hands wouldn't stay still. They kept returning to the wrapped plate in his coat, checking its weight, then returning again. Vandrian's words stayed with him. Purpose-built. One piece meant there had to be others. Had to be. But where? The drown quarter was the obvious answer. Half the city had collapsed into the bay over the centuries. Tide and storm carried things where they didn't belong, and shook loose what time had forgotten. Abe had worked the waterfront long enough to know what the drowned quarter gave you. What turned up down there was never in good enough shape to matter. But this plate was. Abe reached the far end of the cliff-cut steps and turned toward the harbor. His pace quickened. Vandrian knew more than he'd let on, of that he was sure. He just needed to know where to look. His mind kept coming back to Liesenhold. He'd heard the stories for years. The ruins of Liesenhold, old chambers sealed beneath the tower. A Medusa said to lair somewhere below, depending on who you asked, the details of the stories changing every time the tale was told. But it was enough to keep people away. Enough to let rumor do the guarding. By the time he reached the waterfront, Abe knew where he needed to go. Vandrian's help would start where people could reach without risking too much. Abe would go where people refused to look. When he reached the shop, the plan was already settled. Supplies, equipment, low tide, a dawn crossing while the causeway was still passable. He would go to Liesenhold. He set the wrapped plate on the counter. One piece, but not for long. Chapter 20. The Absence. After the conversation with Abe, Uzaya waited for the tide to recede. He stopped at a weathered table overlooking the harbor and stayed longer than he meant to. Sunlight crept across the planks as he watched the quarter below him, its streets stepping downward toward the water, buildings settling into the slope where the city had stopped repairing them. Roof lines overlapped in uneven tiers, patched and repatched where nothing was ever finished. The place was broken, not abandoned, still holding together somehow. The water eventually retreated from the seawall, exposing pilings stained in bands of green and black. When the tide pulled back far enough, he went. The warehouse stood where Abe had said it would, along the southern seawall, a stretch no one dared enter anymore. Nothing there had ever been rebuilt. The building leaned against the stone wall behind it, like it was built that way. The roof had collapsed in sections years ago, leaving gaps where the afternoon light could come through. Beams jutted at broken angles, few still holding weight. Salt had worked its way into every exposed plank, crystallizing in the grain. Moss grew thick along the foundation, dark and spongy, water seeping out when he pressed his boot down. The back deck sagged into the canal. The pilings bore the waterline in layers, algae slick, barnacle crust, wood softened by rot. Another winter would send the whole structure sliding into the water. As he approached, mounds of shell fragments and gravel crunched under his boots. No one had been here in months, possibly years. The place was too far gone to salvage, too dangerous to inhabit, and too expensive to tear down. He stepped under what remained of the awning. The interior was shadow and ruin. Broken crates split open, their contents long since dissolved into black pulp. A rusted crane hook dangled from a beam overhead, swaying slightly with the subtle motions of the whole rotted structure. The central column stood in the middle of the floor. Timber post, thick as a man's torso, braced with iron bands gone orange with rust. Abe said the trap door was just past it. Uzaya moved carefully. The floorboards looked unstable. They groaned under his weight, but held. He found the hatch exactly where Abe described. Square frame set flush into the floor, nearly invisible under decades of grime and debris. The iron ring was solid rust, edges blurred where metal had oxidized into red-brown powder. Uzaya knelt and brushed away the dirt and scum. He gripped the iron ring, pulled. It resisted. He braced his weight, muscles straining, and pulled harder. The ring came free with a sound like tearing metal. Rust flaked off in chunks and crumbled to the floor. The hatch swung open. Cold air rushed up from below, stale, heavy with moisture and time. Air that hadn't mixed with the surface in decades. Uzaya couldn't see what lay at the bottom. Darkness. Iron rungs, bolted into stone, led down. Some were solid. Others had rusted through enough to leave questions. He began his descent, hand over hand, testing each rung before trusting it with his full weight. 10 feet down, 20, 30. Iron rungs groaned as he descended. The square of light from the trapdoor above shrank as he went deeper. 40 feet, 50. Then the ladder ended. In darkness, he felt his boots touch stone. He drew the glowstone from his pack. The blue light barely reached beyond his boots. He was standing at the end of a narrow corridor. Low ceiling, he could reach up and touch it without stretching. Walls close enough that he could span them with outstretched arms. The city above might as well have been another world. He moved forward. The corridor sloped downward, gradually at first, then more steeply. The walls were slick with moisture that never dried. Water pooled in depressions along the floor, ankle-deep in places. He moved slowly, waterlogged boots dragging. Old maintenance markings scarred the walls every 20 feet or so. Rusted lantern hooks jutting from stone at irregular intervals. Broken pipes that might have carried water, waste, or something else entirely, emptied into the passage at odd intervals. All of this was obviously human construction. Infrastructure from when the quarter still believed it could hold back the ocean. The evidence of that belief's failure dripped from every surface. A support beam had fallen ahead, wedged across the passage at chest height. He squeezed around it carefully, slowly, not wanting to be the reason the whole ceiling finally fell down. The corridor branched twice. Both times he chose the path that sloped downward, following Abe's directions from memory. Left at the first split, straight through the second. Time became difficult to track. No sunlight, no sense of the outside world, just the slow descent through darkness, the splash beneath his boots, the steady drip echoing ahead of him. The glowstone's light seemed unable to match the darkness. The air grew colder the deeper he went. He noticed the odor of something more mineral. He'd been descending for over an hour when the corridor finally ended. A pile of rubble blocked the passage ahead, broken stone and rotting support beams. It wasn't moving without tools, crew, and time. Uzaya stood at the blockage, studying it in the weak blue light. Along the left side, near the floor, the debris had shifted. A gap opened there, 3 feet across, its edges sharper and drier than the older rubble. Uzaya crouched, brushing the edge with his hand. Dry. Recent. He knelt at the opening and held his glowstone over it. The light found stone below. He sat at the edge, legs dangling into the drop. The opening was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He considered the climb back up, whether he'd be able to reach the edge from below, whether this was the kind of decision you didn't come back from. He secured a rope, tested to make sure it would hold, and dropped it down. Uzaya felt a deep vibration pulsing through the floor into his legs. Then again, this time the pendant resonated along with it. He could hear it, too, a deep frequency most would not perceive. A decision was made. He pushed his pack through first, heard it hit the stone below with a wet slap. Satisfied, he positioned himself in the gap. He slid down into the opening, legs first. Air dropped beneath him. The shaft narrowed at his waist and caught, momentum driving him lower. The walls cinched around his shoulders, edges snagging coat and belt, the dagger grinding against stone. He hung there, wedged, breath flattened against the pressure in his ribs. He did not struggle. Instead, he tested the walls. A measured shift, a turn of the shoulder. Fabric tore as he forced space where there was none. Stone scraped his face. His shoulder caught on a jut of rock. For a heartbeat, he held. Then something shifted. Stone cracked, chips falling, then heavier fragments breaking loose and clattering into the hollow below. The pressure gave, and his grip slipped from the rope. He fell. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a sharp grunt that echoed into darkness. He lay still, breathing through the pain in his ribs. Uzaya brushed himself off, retrieved his pack, and began to assess his situation. The world had opened into nothing. He was standing in a cavernous chamber. His glowstone dimmed. He raised it higher and squinted, but the light went nowhere. That was how he knew something stood across the void. The darkness stopped. A straight edge cut through it, not revealed by light, but by where the glow failed to travel. A vertical face rose from the floor into the unseen ceiling, flat and exact, too clean to belong to any cave. The vibration came from beyond it, through it. A steady resonance of sound and pressure felt in his chest, his spine, the base of his skull. He stood there, trying to orient himself. The wall of stone before him denied any sense of scale, less like something constructed than something the world had closed over and forgotten. Even here the mist remained. It drifted through the glowstone's light and kept to his steps. The crossing took longer than it should have. The ground was treacherous. Boulders of every size were strewn across the cavern floor. Between them, shattered rock lay in unstable heaps and shallow craters, erasing any clear path. He picked his way between the fallen blocks. The low hum began to distort his sense of distance. He stopped, checked his position, then checked it again, unsure how far he had truly come. The wall drew closer. 60 feet. 30. 10. Up close, the surface resolved into a single plane. Mirror-black stone rose beyond sight, unbroken, as if carved from a singular mass too vast to be moved. A collapse had torn open a narrow descent beside the wall. Rubble lay heaped to either side, leaving a tight path downward. This was the way in. The tunnel entrance opened into a corridor, hewn of dark, polished stone. The floor, the walls, everything was crafted from the same material, seamless. Rib-like supports, shaped to bear immense weight, ran the length of each passage. Geometric carvings were worked into the stone, suggesting some sort of function rather than decoration. Uzaya felt his ears pop. He was deep now, far deeper than the maintenance tunnels allowed. He felt the weight of the quarter above. The vibration was constant. His teeth hummed with it. His chest resonated faintly, as if his whole body was being tuned. The corridor sloped downward. After a time, he entered a smooth, elliptical passage. He followed its bend until it opened into a circular chamber. Stone pillars rose around the chamber's perimeter, climbing into darkness, the glowstone failing before they ended. The walls were carved with the same patterns he'd seen in the old structure beneath Hearth's End. Larger, more complex, but unmistakable. Uzaya stopped at the threshold. Here the air thrummed in deep pulses. The stone of the chamber itself carried a faint green luminescence, enough to hold the room in shape. Winged statues flanked a long slab at the center of the chamber, their faces smashed flat. No markings, no inscriptions, only a shallow concavity in the middle. Color radiated from the object resting there, scattering across the green-lit stone. An ovoid set with gems of blue, red, and yellow. Light bent along its surface. Prismatic waves shimmered across it like heat rising from desert sand. Its outline refused to settle, as if his eyes could not agree on what they were seeing. The hum intensified as he stepped closer. The pendant at his chest felt cold. Not a warning, refusal. As Uzaya reached for it, his hand slowed against an unseen resistance. His fingers hovered just short of contact. The hum in the chamber shifted again, discordant, until it settled on an agreed equilibrium. The vibration in the air moved lower in his body, settling at the base of his spine. Then he heard movement, still distant, something heavy. Uzaya pressed himself back against the wall. Mist gathered and contracted around him, blurring the edges. Something was coming. He held still, breath shallow, waiting for the moment to resolve. The monstrosity entered the chamber from a passage he hadn't seen. It dragged itself forward on thick tentacles that sealed to the stone and hauled its weight across the cavern floor. Each limb released with a slow, wet pull, the movement deliberate and exact. Its body was slick and dark, layered in dense ridges pulled tight around its central mass. The eye lay exposed, immense and luminous, ringed by layered growth rising in uneven bands. A faint green light swept the chamber in measured arcs as the iris turned in a slow spiral. The longer he watched it, the more effort it required to turn away. It moved from anchor to anchor without haste, its eye sweeping the chamber as it went. The mist had blurred Uzaya's outline, dulling the edges of his cloak until he was little more than shadow against shadow. The green light lingered at the altar where the stone lay for a long moment. Then the Sentinel rotated in place and left the same way it had come. The vibration eased as the horror disappeared back into the darkness. Uzaya waited, counting his breaths. Time stretched thin, measured only by the ache settling into his muscles. When the hum of the chamber returned to its original pace, he rose from the shadows, slowly. The mist thinned around him, but did not leave. He moved to the altar and took hold of the stone. Resistance met his fingers as they closed around it. He paused at the sensation, felt the hum shift, but did not hesitate. He forced the stone into his arms. It was frigid. The cold sank into his hands. His fingers wanted to let go. He tightened them anyway, knuckles whitening. The stone was far heavier than he expected. It slipped. He caught it against his chest as the hum oscillated. Movement. Shuffling echoes. Then the embedded gems flared in perfect unison before breaking back into their competing pulses. No alarm sounded. No structure shifted. No ward rose to resist him. Uzaya moved back to the shadows and slung his pack over one shoulder like a sling, stabilizing the stone there against his chest. When he was just about ready to leave, he saw it. The Sentinel standing in the chamber entrance. It was massive, its bulk held by thick tentacles anchored to the stone floor and walls. Its singular eye was fixed on the altar's center. The absence. This close, the Sentinel's details became clear. Its body was layered in overlapping plates, ridged and scarred, edges chipped. The armor constricted toward the eye, leaving it exposed and aimed. The eye swelled. The green light bled through that wet surface and fell upon where he crouched. Uzaya felt himself locked in place by its attention. The pupil contracted. The sound tore out of the Sentinel in a sustained shriek, a single, brutal frequency. Uzaya's vision fractured at once. White bands split the world as the noise drove through bone and brain alike. His jaw locked, his teeth vibrated. Dust shook loose from the ceiling as the chamber became a pressure vessel. Uzaya fell to one knee, balance failing him. His breath stalled in his chest as the sound continued, raw and unrelenting. It stopped. The silence hit almost as hard. Uzaya staggered up, ears screaming, a thin, high ringing that refused to fade. The chamber swam, edges soft and unreal, as if the world had slipped 1 degree out of focus. Then the stone answered. Wrapped against his chest, it flared once, bright and undeniable. Uzaya felt the signal pass through him rather than settle, the response carrying on through the stone beneath his feet and far into the dark places below the city. The Sentinel moved toward him, glistening tentacles hauling its mass steadily across the chamber. Uzaya ran. The stone's weight wrenched him sideways as he sprinted across the chamber floor. Behind him, tentacles slapped stone. He hit the breach by the wall at full speed, shoulders scraping the edges as he climbed back out. The cavern opened beyond. He crossed the debris field at a dead run, boots slipping on unstable ground, stone shards skittering beneath him, the stone battering painfully against his ribs with every step. The sinkhole yawned ahead, high in the cavern wall. The rope still hung from its rim. He tied the stone to the end, grabbed the rope, and hauled himself up. Hands burning, shoulders screaming. He wedged through the opening, gathered the rope, and pulled hard. As the stone rose, a faint green light flashed across the space below. Uzaya didn't wait. He kept moving, hauling the stone down the old maintenance corridor, forcing it past the collapsed beam until he reached the bottom of the ladder to the surface. This time he climbed without testing the rungs. One arm braced the stone, while the other reached blindly upward. Light bled from the hatch above. When he reached the top, he dropped the stone onto the warehouse floor and collapsed beside it, lungs burning. The hatch slammed shut. The Sentinel below would not forget. Chapter 21. The Bounty. Uzaya woke to the memory of a green haze, the Guardian's eye fixed on him. Realization. The scream that marked him. The stone lay wrapped at the foot of the cot. Sleep had come thin and uneven, breaking apart the moment it began. What dreams surfaced never lasted long enough to form. The sense of something behind him that did not tire, did not hurry, and did not need to. Ribs bruised where the tight passage had crushed him, palms raw. Shoulders aching from hauling the stone up 60 feet of ladder, its weight dragging against his chest. He sat up slowly. Morning light leaked through the shutters in thin bands. He lay still, waiting for it. The smell of bacon never came. He pulled on his boots and stepped into the narrow hall. Abe's door was closed. Uzaya opened it. Bed untouched, everything in place. On the wall hung several old satchels and a worn pack Abe had carried at different times over the years. Leather cracked, stitching mended, one strap torn and knotted back on itself. He turned back down the hall and went downstairs. The memory of the tentacled thing lingered, its presence wrong in a way he couldn't shake. Not wholly otherworldly, too wet, too physical. He felt with cold certainty his trespass would not go unanswered. That thing with the luminous eye and tentacles like living roots, that sound it made, the psychic scream, more than an alarm, it had marked him. He decided. The stone had to go. Selling it would be best. Even if he couldn't, he had to be rid of it. Abe's words came back. Vandrian at the Silver Spire. He's the only one in Eldenport I would trust with something unusual. Pays fairly, doesn't ask questions. Uzaya returned to his room. He wrapped the stone in cloth and worked the straps into place, settling it against his shoulder and chest. He felt the resistance immediately. Even without contact, a force pushed back, making each adjustment harder than it should have been. He checked his coat pocket. 2 gold coins left. Whatever Vandrian paid, at least he would be rid of it. Fog rolled in thick sheets across the quarter, softening edges, swallowing distance. After a few steps, he glanced back. Abe's curiosities was already gone, erased as cleanly as if it had never been there. The mist kept pace with him, swirling about his boots, never quite falling behind. The walk took close to an hour. As the ground rose toward the cliffs, he could taste the salt spray carried on the wind from the bay. The spire came into view at the cliff's edge, overlooking the bay below, drawn directly from the southeastern face. Smooth living rock rose into slender spires and flawless relief, the stone shaped with a precision that no chisel could have achieved. Nothing about it invited approach. The path narrowed into steps cut into the rock itself, steep and unforgiving. On one side, empty air and the drop to the cove below. On the other, iron rings and lengths of chain driven into the stone at irregular intervals, slick with spray. Uzaya started up. The stone he carried resisted him with every step, its force shifting unpredictably, as though it were fighting to slip free. One hand stayed on the chain, the other steadied the pack. He was aware of how exposed he was. Anyone watching from the spire would see the entire ascent. The stair leveled onto a broad stone forecourt before the entrance, carved clean from the cliff and left bare. It ran 20 or 30 feet along the spire's base before the drop resumed. By the time he reached the door, salt spray had soaked his cloak. He drew his shoulders in against the wind and cold. No guard, no sign. Just the door, a slab of stone shaped flush into the cliff face, its outline defined by seams cut too clean to be natural. Uzaya knocked. Bolts shifted. A moment passed. The door opened partially, then paused. Vandrian peered through the crack, surprise flickering briefly as he took Uzaya in. The pale skin, the drawn look of him. Not a client, not what he expected. His eyes shifted almost immediately to what Uzaya carried. The size of it, the way it was strapped tight against his chest, the effort it must have taken to get it here. "That's a lot to bring up my stairs," he said carefully. Uzaya shifted his grip on the straps and waited, shivering in the wind. The door opened a little wider. "I brought something you should see." "You look like you've had a climb." The door opened the rest of the way. "Come in. Let's see what you have." The interior was exactly what Uzaya expected of a mage. More workshop than home. Candlelight broke unevenly across the walls. catching on diagrams of arcane design pinned wherever there was space. Others clipped to shelves or tucked beneath instruments. Over the work tables, a colder, steadier glow held, revealing half-built mechanisms, glass components, coils of wire, rune-etched metal plates. Nothing looked finished. Nothing looked put away. A library occupied the back alcove, books packed tight and stacked where they did not fit. The air carried the sharp tang of electrical discharge and hot metal, copper bitter, as if something had been active not too long ago. Vandrian took his place behind the counter. "Put it here," he said. Uzaya set his pack down and unwrapped the stone. Knowing what it was didn't lessen the unease it stirred. The object itself was rough and worked, its surface uneven beneath the marks of long, deliberate shaping. The stone was pocked, full of shallow voids like trapped air, as if it had once been molten. Light failed to settle on it, breaking apart across the uneven surface and going nowhere. The gems were another matter. Large, rough, and half-exposed. Set at regular intervals, their arrangement suggested more than decoration. Vandrian's attention was drawn to them immediately. "Don't assume you understand what this is," Uzaya said. Vandrian glanced up at him. "I don't," he replied. He reached to a nearby shelf and uncorked a small vial, tipping a few drops onto the surface. The liquid spread, beaded, then ran off without reaction. No hiss, no heat, no shift. Vandrian waited. Still nothing. He set the vial aside and placed both hands on the table, on either side of the stone, still wary before committing to contact. Moments passed. "All right," he said finally. "It's stable." Only then did he lay his hands on it for a closer examination. After some time, he stopped. "This is..." He paused, then tried again. "It's older than our history." Uzaya did not argue. Vandrian adjusted the lamp and studied the placement of the gems for a long moment before speaking. "Where did you find this artifact?" Uzaya looked him in the eyes. "Is that what it is?" Vandrian paused, then glanced back to the table. "That's what I'm calling it, for now. Artifacts like this don't change hands casually," he added. The pause lingered. "Do you want it or not?" Uzaya asked. Vandrian didn't answer immediately. He stood over the table without touching the stone, eyes fixed, breath shallow, weighing something Uzaya couldn't see. "If your intent is to part with this," Vandrian said carefully, "I can offer substantial coin, more than fair. This is... I'm not sure there's a word for what this is." "Make your offer," Uzaya said. Vandrian nodded once. "Give me a moment." He disappeared into a back room. A lock turned, metal scraped against metal. When he returned, the leather satchel in his hands strained against its seams. He set it on the table. The weight spoke for itself. Uzaya opened it. Gold, some platinum, and a scattering of shiny gems catching the light. "I think you'll find that fair." Uzaya grabbed the bag and threw it into his pack. He didn't bother counting. He was quick to thank Vandrian politely and turned to leave. "Good luck, my friend," Vandrian said. Uzaya paused at the door, considered a reply. He chose silence. When the door closed behind him, he heard a lock turn. Outside, the morning air felt colder than before. Vandrian was capable. The stone would draw interest. As Uzaya descended the cliff path, mist rose from the sea below and found him, familiar as breath. He didn't think about the silver spire again, or about Vandrian. The scream answered instead. The green eye, the moment of recognition. Selling the stone hadn't changed that. His thoughts turned towards Abe's disappearance, his empty shop. The possibilities were many, all bad. It was just past noon when Uzaya returned to Abe's curiosities. The shop stood as he'd left it, unchanged. Here, Abe's absence pressed harder. Uzaya set the heavy pouch on the table beside the lattice scale. The weight should have felt like something earned, like options. It didn't. Uzaya went upstairs, Abe's room still untouched. Cloak still hanging on its peg. A small chest beneath the window held a few personal items, letters, a handful of coins, a knife worn smooth by use. Nothing that could explain where Abe had gone. Uzaya turned to leave, then stopped. Hanging on the back of the door was Abe's satchel, or one of them. Nearly worn out, old leather, frayed straps, perhaps kept as a backup. Uzaya opened the clasps. Maps, old survey sheets of the quarter and the surrounding ruins. Notes in Abe's hand, cramped and precise, tracking tide patterns, structural weaknesses, and safe approaches through collapsed areas. Beneath them lay a single sheet of fresh parchment with writing. Liesenhold, Lower Terrace, Tide Window, Dawn. Uzaya folded the sketch and slipped it into his coat. He stood at the front window for a long while, watching fog roll across the street. He took Abe's chair and watched the fire burn down to embers. He knew he should eat. He knew he should sleep. Instead, he sat there, letting the quiet settle, letting the place feel empty. The chair, the counter, the familiar clutter left exactly as it always was. Too final to ignore. He would look for him tomorrow, when the tide pulled back. Tonight, there was nothing to do but sit with the absence.